Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Dinner. Vince Rodriguez stood in his kitchen at 2 a.m., methodically cleaning the last of the cast iron pans. 3 days of preparation. 23 carefully planned portions of his wife Miranda's favorite dishes. The lamb had been marinating for 48 hours. The dessert, a custom chocolate souffle recipe he'd perfected over months, sat cooling in the refrigerator, waiting for a celebration that would never come. His phone buzzed on the granite counter. Miranda's text glowed in the darkness. "We've decided to celebrate at a restaurant. It's real family only. Real family." Vince set down the pan with deliberate precision. In his 20-year military career, he'd learned to control his breathing during moments of crisis. In Afghanistan, that control had saved lives. Tonight, it might save his marriage or end it forever. He scrolled up through their text thread. For weeks, Miranda had been enthusiastic about the home celebration. She'd specifically requested he take time off from his consulting firm to cook. She made lists. She'd insisted on the guest count of 23, including her sister's family, her college friends, even her difficult mother. But now, suddenly, it was real family only at some restaurant. And somehow, her husband of 15 years didn't qualify. Vince walked to his study, muscle memory guiding him through the dark house. The room held relics of his former life. Commendations from 3 tours overseas, photos with his unit, and in the locked bottom drawer of his desk, tools and contacts he'd hoped never to use again. Vincent Rodriguez wasn't just any consultant. He was a former Army intelligence officer who'd spent a decade in psychological operations. He pulled out a burner phone and activated the tracking app he'd installed on Miranda's iPhone 6 months ago. Not out of suspicion, but habit. Old training died hard. The phone showed her current location, Grandview Heights, the affluent neighborhood across town. At 2:15 a.m., she wasn't at her sister's house. She wasn't at her mother's. She was at 847 Maple Ridge Drive, a property that, according to his quick online search, belonged to one Bradley Thornton, a real estate developer who'd recently moved from Seattle. Vince had never heard Miranda mention Bradley Thornton. He spent the next hour conducting what he mentally cataloged as basic reconnaissance. Social media revealed Bradley was recently divorced, owned several properties across the state, and had apparently met Miranda at a charity gala 3 months ago, an event Vince hadn't attended due to a work commitment. The photos on Bradley's Instagram told the story. Expensive restaurants, wine tastings, gallery openings, and in several recent photos, partially cropped out but clearly visible, was Miranda's distinctive silver bracelet, the one Vince had bought her for their 10th anniversary. By 4 a.m., Vince had constructed a timeline. The charity gala in March. A sudden increase in Miranda's girls' nights out. Her new interest in yoga classes that seemed to run long. Her suggestion that Vince needed to work on himself and be more spontaneous. The final piece clicked into place when he found the receipt. Miranda had left her purse on the kitchen counter, and tucked inside was a dinner receipt for 2 from Romano's, dated last Tuesday, when she'd claimed to be working late. The receipt showed 2 entrees, a bottle of wine that cost more than most people's car payments, and a dessert they'd shared. Vince photographed everything with military precision, then returned each item to its exact position. In his years of intelligence work, he'd learned that premature exposure was the enemy of a successful operation. Miranda would never see him coming. As dawn broke over their suburban home, Vince made coffee and sat at the kitchen island, surrounded by enough food for 23 people. He'd spent 15 years building what he thought was an unshakable foundation with Miranda. They'd weathered his deployments, his transition to civilian life, his struggles with civilian authority. She'd been his anchor. But anchors, he now realized, could also be weights that dragged you down. His phone buzzed again. Miranda, sorry honey, got too tired and crashed at Jenny's. See you tonight. Thanks for understanding about the party change. Love you. Jenny lived in Riverside, 40 minutes in the opposite direction from Grandview Heights. Vince deleted the message without responding. In the military, they taught him that every mission required three things: intelligence, planning, and execution. He had the intelligence now. It was time to begin planning. He opened his laptop and began researching Bradley Thornton in earnest. By the time Miranda returned home that evening, Vince would know everything there was to know about the man who'd stolen his wife. And more importantly, he'd know exactly how to destroy him. Chapter 2. Intelligence Gathering. Miranda returned home at 6 p.m., her hair perfectly styled despite supposedly sleeping at Jenny's house. She kissed Vince's cheek with practiced affection and immediately began chattering about her day, a habit he'd once found endearing but now recognized as a deflection technique. "The restaurant was amazing," she said, pulling leftovers from her purse. Expensive-looking containers that definitely didn't come from any place that served real family dinners. "Mom actually behaved herself for once, and the kids loved the atmosphere." Vince nodded and made appropriate noises while mentally cataloging each lie. He'd already confirmed that Miranda's mother was in Florida visiting her own sister. The kids she referenced were a nephew and niece who'd posted Instagram stories from a baseball game across town during the supposed dinner time. "I'm sorry about all your cooking," Miranda continued, gesturing vaguely at the refrigerator full of untouched food. "Maybe we can have some friends over this weekend?" "Of course," Vince replied smoothly. "Whatever you think is best." That night, while Miranda slept, Vince began phase 2 of his intelligence operation. Using skills he'd honed tracking insurgents in foreign countries, he built a comprehensive profile of Bradley Thornton. The man was 42, divorced 8 months ago after his wife discovered he'd been systematically manipulating their joint finances to fund his gambling addiction. The divorce papers, which Vince accessed through methods that would have concerned a civilian attorney, revealed Bradley had been forced to liquidate most of his assets to pay debts. The real estate empire Bradley projected on social media was largely fictional. He owned 3 properties, all heavily mortgaged, and was facing foreclosure proceedings on 2 of them. His development company existed primarily on paper and borrowed credibility. More interesting was Bradley's pattern. Vince found similar stories in Seattle and Portland. Wealthy women, whirlwind affairs, sudden financial entanglements. Bradley had a type: successful, married women who felt underappreciated by their husbands. He studied them, learned their vulnerabilities, then exploited those weaknesses for financial gain. Miranda fit the profile perfectly. Her inheritance from her grandmother sat in an account she'd maintained separately from their joint finances. Nearly $400,000 that Vince had never touched, respecting her desire for independence. According to bank records he probably shouldn't have been able to access, Miranda had withdrawn $50,000 3 weeks ago. The pieces of Bradley's operation became clear over the next few days of surveillance. He ran what amounted to a long-term confidence game, presenting himself as a successful developer while actually targeting vulnerable women for their assets. The expensive dinners, the luxury appearances, all funded by his marks until he could gain access to larger sums. But Vince also discovered something else. Bradley wasn't working alone. His research revealed a network of associates in various cities, all running similar operations. Phone records showed regular contact with men in Phoenix, Denver, and Miami who seemed to be running identical schemes. On Thursday evening, Vince followed Miranda to what she'd claimed was a book club meeting. Instead, she drove to a high-end apartment complex where Bradley was waiting in the parking garage. Vince watched from a distance as they embraced with the familiarity of longtime lovers, not new acquaintances. Inside Bradley's apartment, which Vince observed through military-grade surveillance equipment he'd retrieved from storage, the scene was everything he'd expected. Bradley had created a carefully staged environment designed to impress. Expensive art, luxury furniture, a wine collection that probably cost more than most people's cars. All of it, Vince now knew, financed through previous relationships and current debt. He watched Miranda laugh at Bradley's jokes, saw her look at this man the way she used to look at him 15 years ago. But more than the infidelity, what enraged Vince was the manipulation. Bradley was playing Miranda like a chess piece, and she was too intoxicated by the attention to see it. That night, Vince made his first move. Using techniques from his psychological operations training, he began what the military called environmental manipulation. He hacked Bradley's credit monitoring service and triggered fraud alerts on his accounts. He anonymously reported zoning violations at Bradley's properties to the city planning office. He arranged for building inspections to be scheduled at inconvenient times. Nothing traceable. Nothing illegal enough to raise suspicions. Just enough pressure to make Bradley's life slightly more complicated each day. By Friday, Bradley was fielding calls from banks, city officials, and creditors. Vince watched the man's confident facade begin to crack as his carefully constructed world started experiencing unexplained problems. But this was just the beginning. Vince had learned that Bradley was planning something bigger with Miranda, something that would require her to access her inheritance. Phone conversations, captured through monitoring devices Vince had placed in their usual meeting locations, revealed that Bradley intended to convince Miranda to invest in a property development project. The final piece fell into place when Vince discovered the timeline. Bradley planned to propose the investment on Saturday, Miranda's actual birthday. He'd arranged a romantic evening designed to culminate in her agreeing to trust him with her financial future. Vince spent Friday night in his study, surrounded by intelligence files that painted a clear picture of the conspiracy against his marriage and his life. In Afghanistan, he dismantled insurgent networks through patience, planning, and precise execution. This situation required the same approach. He opened a secure communication channel to contacts he hadn't spoken to in years, people who owed him favors from his military service. It was time to call on those debts. By Saturday morning, Vince had assembled everything he needed for his counterstrike. Bradley Thornton thought he was hunting a naive housewife, but he'd actually wandered into the crosshairs of someone far more dangerous than he could imagine. The 15 hours Miranda had mentioned in her timeline, that would be from Saturday night to Sunday afternoon. That's when Bradley's world would begin to collapse, and Miranda would learn exactly what happened to people who betrayed Vincent Rodriguez. Chapter 3. The Setup. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that should have made for a perfect birthday celebration. Instead, Vince spent the morning preparing for war. Miranda was in an unusually good mood, humming while she got ready for what she claimed was a quiet birthday dinner with just a few close friends. She bought a new dress, black, expensive, and definitely not the kind of thing she'd wear to a casual dinner with female friends. "You sure you'll be okay tonight?" she asked, applying lipstick in their bedroom mirror. "I know it's last minute, leaving you alone on my birthday." "I'll survive," Vince replied, watching her through the reflection. "Maybe I'll catch up on some work." Miranda kissed him goodbye at 7 p.m., and Vince immediately activated the final phase of his preparation. He'd spent the week positioning assets like pieces on a chessboard. Now it was time to start moving them. First, he confirmed Miranda's location at Bradley's apartment. Then he made a series of phone calls that would have terrified Bradley if he'd understood their significance. The first call went to Marcus Webb, a former Army Ranger who now ran a private security firm in Phoenix. Marcus owed Vince's life from an operation in Kandahar and had been waiting 8 years to return the favor. "I need surveillance on a network," Vince told him. "Multi-city operation. Financial fraud targeting married women." Marcus didn't ask questions. Within an hour, he deployed teams to monitor Bradley's associates in 3 states. The second call went to Lisa Chun, a cybersecurity specialist who'd served under Vince in military intelligence. Lisa now worked for a federal agency that preferred to remain unnamed, but she maintained private consulting work for special clients. "I need a financial forensics package," Vince explained. "Full background on multiple subjects, pattern analysis, and evidence compilation." Lisa's work was always thorough, always legal, and always admissible in court if necessary. The third call was to Tommy Kowalski, a former Marine who transitioned into Hollywood stunt work after leaving the service. Tommy specialized in creating realistic scenarios for training purposes, scenarios that could easily be adapted for other uses. By 10 p.m., Vince's network was fully operational. Marcus confirmed that Bradley's associates in other cities were indeed running identical operations, targeting at least 12 women across 4 states. Lisa had compiled enough financial evidence to prosecute Bradley and his network under federal fraud statutes. And Tommy was en route to implement what Vince privately called the education protocol. Meanwhile, through his surveillance of Bradley's apartment, Vince watched the evening unfold exactly as predicted. Bradley had spared no expense. Champagne, roses, a meal from the city's most exclusive restaurant. He was pulling out every weapon in his manipulation arsenal. At 11:30 p.m., Bradley made his pitch. Vince listened through his audio surveillance as the man painted a picture of a revolutionary real estate development that would triple Miranda's investment within 6 months. The property was supposedly in an up-and-coming neighborhood, pre-approved for luxury condominiums, with buyers already lined up. All eyes, of course. Vince had investigated the property in question. It was contaminated land with soil issues that would cost millions to remediate. Bradley knew this, but was counting on Miranda's trust and his own charm to close the deal. Miranda was hesitant at first. She mentioned needing to discuss it with her husband, which made Bradley's mask slip for just a moment. Vince saw the flash of anger cross the man's face before he recovered his composure. "Vincent's a good man," Bradley said smoothly, "but he's not an entrepreneur. This kind of opportunity requires someone who understands risk and reward. You've been carrying the financial responsibility in your marriage for years, haven't you?" The psychological manipulation was textbook. Bradley was isolating Miranda from her support system while positioning himself as her financial savior. It was exactly the kind of operation Vince had disrupted dozens of times overseas, just with different stakes. At midnight, Miranda agreed to the investment. She would transfer the money on Monday, giving Bradley access to her grandmother's inheritance. In exchange, she would become Bradley's development partner and, eventually, his wife after she divorced Vince. That's when Vince's phone rang with a call from Marcus. "Package is ready for delivery." At 12:30 a.m., while Miranda and Bradley celebrated their agreement with champagne and increasingly intimate conversation, Vince made one final call. This one went to Detective Ray Morrison, an old friend from his civilian days who worked financial crimes for the state police. "Ray, I need you to know that tomorrow you're going to receive a very interesting package about a multi-state fraud operation. The evidence is solid, the case is federal, and you're going to be the hero who cracked it." Ray had learned not to ask too many questions about Vince's sources, but he always followed up on the intelligence. Their clearance rate for financial crimes had improved dramatically since their friendship began. By 1 a.m., all the pieces were in position. Bradley thought he'd conquered another victim, but he'd actually walked into a trap that had been months in the making. In 15 hours, his world would begin to collapse in ways he couldn't imagine. Miranda thought she'd found her escape from a boring marriage and a chance at financial independence. Instead, she'd positioned herself at the center of a federal criminal investigation that would destroy everything she thought she was building. And Vince thought about the 23 people he'd cooked for, the 3 days of preparation for a celebration that never happened, and the 15 years of marriage that had ended with a text message about real family. In his military career, Vince had learned that some enemies could be negotiated with, some could be contained, and some had to be completely eliminated. Bradley and Miranda had placed themselves in the third category. As he prepared for bed, Vince reflected on a lesson from his psychological operations training. The most effective attacks weren't the ones your enemies saw coming. They were the ones that used their own momentum against them, turning their victories into their downfall. Tomorrow, the door would start shaking, but not the way Miranda expected. Chapter 4. The First Domino. Sunday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of weather that made people want to stay in bed and postpone their responsibilities. Miranda certainly seemed inclined toward that approach. She didn't return home until nearly noon, claiming she'd stayed over at Jenny's again to recover from her birthday celebration. She was glowing with the kind of satisfaction that came from believing you'd successfully deceived someone. Her phone buzzed constantly with texts she answered while smiling, and she hummed while making coffee, completely oblivious to the fact that her world was about to implode. Vince was in his study, monitoring multiple communication channels, when the first domino fell at exactly 1:47 p.m. Detective Morrison called. "Vince, you beautiful bastard, what did you hand me?" How about the FBI calling? The DEA wants to know about money laundering connections, and Internal Revenue is sending a task force. This Bradley Thornton guy isn't just running romance scams. He's part of something massive. Through his surveillance equipment, Vince watched Bradley's phone begin ringing incessantly. The financial pressure Vince had been applying all week had triggered automated systems that flagged unusual activity patterns. When combined with Lisa Chin's forensic evidence package, the result was a perfect storm of law enforcement attention. But Vince wasn't content to let government bureaucracy handle his revenge. While federal agencies mobilized their resources, he activated Tommy Kowalski's more immediate solution. At 2:15 p.m., while Miranda was upstairs taking what she claimed was a relaxation bath, 3 men in professional suits arrived at Bradley's apartment building. To anyone watching, they looked like federal agents. They had badges, unmarked vehicles, and the kind of serious demeanor that suggested important government business. They weren't actually federal agents, of course. They were Tommy's people, former military personnel who specialized in high-stakes role-playing exercises. But their performance was flawless, especially when combined with the very real federal investigation that was simultaneously beginning. Bradley answered his door to find Agent Thompson, showing him a very official-looking warrant for his financial records. The warrant was a prop, but Bradley had no way of knowing that, especially since real federal agents would indeed be arriving within hours with genuine paperwork. Agent Thompson explained that Bradley was under investigation for operating a criminal enterprise across state lines. They had evidence of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy charges that could result in 20 years in federal prison. They needed him to come in for questioning immediately. Bradley's confident facade cracked completely. Through Vince's audio surveillance, he could hear the man's voice rising to near panic as he tried to explain that there must be some mistake. But Agent Thompson was relentless, piling detail upon detail of Bradley's criminal activities, details that were absolutely accurate, thanks to Lisa Chin's investigation. At 2:45 p.m., Bradley made the call Vince had been waiting for. In desperation, he contacted Miranda. "Baby, we have a problem. The feds are here. They know about the business. They know about the money. They're asking about you." Miranda's phone call reached her while she was still in the bathtub upstairs. Vince heard her voice echo off the bathroom tiles as panic replaced her earlier contentment. "What do you mean they're asking about me? I haven't done anything." "They have records of our financial discussions. They know about the investment. They're saying anyone who participated in funding the operation could be charged as an accessory." This was the moment Vince had been building toward. Bradley, in his desperation, was about to throw Miranda under the federal bus to save himself. And Miranda was about to learn exactly what kind of man she'd betrayed her marriage for. "Listen," Bradley continued, his voice taking on the cold, calculating tone that Miranda had never heard before. "You need to deny everything. Tell them you never agreed to invest, that I was just some guy you met casually. If they connect you to the money, we're both fucked." Vince watched Miranda's reflection in the bathroom mirror as she processed what she was hearing. The man she'd fallen in love with, the man she'd planned to leave her husband for, was already planning to sacrifice her to protect himself. "But Bradley, I thought." "You thought what? That this was some romantic fairy tale?" "Jesus, Miranda, use your brain. This was always about the money. If you go down for this, that's your problem." The line went dead. Vince gave Miranda exactly 60 seconds to absorb the full implications of what she'd just heard. Then he made his own call, using a voice modulation device that made him sound like a different person entirely. "Mrs. Rodriguez? This is Agent Williams with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you immediately regarding your relationship with Bradley Thornton and your potential involvement in a federal fraud investigation." Miranda's scream echoed through the house. Vince had heard similar sounds from enemy combatants when they realized their situation was hopeless. It was the sound of someone's world collapsing in real time. 15 minutes later, Miranda stumbled downstairs in a bathrobe, her face pale and her hands shaking. She found Vince in the kitchen, calmly reading a book while drinking coffee. "Vincent," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." Of course, he replied, setting down his book with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained throughout their marriage. What's on your mind? And then she told him everything. The affair, the lies, the planned investment, the federal investigation. She broke down completely, begging for his forgiveness, explaining that she'd been manipulated, that she'd never meant for any of this to happen. Vince listened with the patience of a man who already knew every detail of her confession. When she finished, he set down his coffee cup and looked at her with the kind of cold assessment he'd once reserved for enemy combatants. "Miranda," he said quietly, "you made your choice when you decided I wasn't real family. Now you get to live with the consequences." The doorbell rang. Through the window, Miranda could see two more men in suits standing on their front porch. These ones, Vince knew, were actually federal agents. Chapter 5, The Squeeze. The actual federal agents were nothing like Tommy's theatrical performers. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell and Agent David Park were polite, professional, and absolutely relentless in their systematic dismantling of Miranda's story. They sat in Vince's living room, the same room where Miranda had planned birthday parties and holiday celebrations, and methodically laid out evidence that painted her as a willing participant in a multi-state criminal conspiracy. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Agent Mitchell said, spreading financial documents across the coffee table, "our investigation shows regular communication between you and Mr. Thornton dating back 3 months. You attended multiple meetings where investment strategies were discussed. You made substantial cash withdrawals from your personal account." Miranda kept looking at Vince, clearly expecting him to defend her or at least show some emotion. Instead, he sat quietly in his chair, answering the agent's questions about his wife's activities with the detached precision of someone providing a witness statement. "My wife maintains her own financial accounts," he told them. "She's always been very independent about her grandmother's inheritance. I respected her privacy in those matters," which was absolutely true and made him look like a trusting husband rather than a suspicious one. The agents had built their case carefully. They had phone records, surveillance photos, financial transfers, and recorded conversations that painted a clear picture of conspiracy to commit fraud. What they didn't have yet was definitive proof that Miranda knew Bradley's development project was fraudulent. That's where Agent Park proved most dangerous. He was the psychological profiler of the team, trained to identify deception and manipulation. He studied Miranda's responses, noted her body language, and began probing for the truth. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you claim you believed Mr. Thornton's investment opportunity was legitimate. But our forensic accounting shows you withdrew the money 3 weeks ago, before Mr. Thornton provided you with any concrete documentation about the project. That suggests a level of trust that goes beyond a casual business relationship." Miranda fumbled for an explanation. He seemed very knowledgeable, very successful. "How did you verify his success? Did you visit his other properties? Speak with references? Review financial statements?" Each question tightened the noose. Miranda had done none of the due diligence a rational investor would perform because she wasn't investing based on business logic. She was funding her escape from her marriage. Vince watched the interrogation with professional admiration. These agents were good at their job, but they were working with incomplete information. They knew about the fraud conspiracy, but they didn't understand the deeper betrayal that had motivated it. After 2 hours, the agents concluded their initial interview with a warning that chilled Miranda to her core. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we're treating you as a potential victim at this stage of the investigation. However, if evidence emerges that you were a willing participant in Mr. Thornton's criminal enterprise, your status could change very quickly. We strongly recommend you consult with an attorney." After they left, Miranda collapsed onto the couch, her careful composure finally cracking completely. "Vincent, you have to help me. You know I'm not a criminal. You know I would never intentionally break the law." Vince studied his wife with the same analytical detachment he'd once applied to enemy interrogations. "What I know, Miranda, is that you've been lying to me for months. You've been planning to steal money from our marriage to fund a life with another man. And when that man was threatened, he immediately threw you to the wolves to save himself." "But I love you," she whispered. I made a mistake, but I love you. No, Vince replied, his voice carrying the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. You love the security I provide. You love the lifestyle our marriage enables. But you don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have excluded me from real family. That evening, while Miranda huddled in their bedroom, making desperate phone calls to attorneys, Vince received updates from his network. The federal investigation was expanding rapidly. Bradley's associates in other cities were being arrested. Financial institutions were freezing accounts. The romance fraud network that had operated for years was collapsing within hours. But the most interesting development came from Marcus Webb's surveillance team. They discovered that Bradley had fled his apartment shortly after the fake federal agents left. He'd withdrawn his remaining cash, packed hastily, and was now driving south toward Mexico. Unfortunately for Bradley, Marcus's team included former Special Forces operators who specialized in tracking high-value targets across difficult terrain. Running away from this particular problem would prove impossible. Tommy Kowalski called with an update on Bradley's psychological state. Your boy is completely broken. The fake federal visit, combined with the real investigation, has him convinced he's facing life in prison. He's been calling his associates, trying to coordinate a defense, but half of them have already been arrested. And Miranda? Vince asked. She's been calling him nonstop. He's not answering. From what I can intercept of his communications, he's telling his lawyer that she was just a mark who got in too deep. He's planning to testify against her to reduce his own sentence. This was the crucial moment in Vince's plan. Bradley and Miranda had to be isolated from each other, each believing the other was their greatest threat. Their affair had been built on mutual deception and manipulation. Now those same qualities would destroy them both. Vince made one final call of the evening, this one to Detective Morrison. Ray, you should know that your federal colleagues might be interested in some additional evidence I've uncovered. It seems Mrs. Rodriguez has been documenting her relationship with Mr. Thornton quite extensively. Photos, text messages, financial planning discussions. The kind of evidence that shows clear intent to defraud. Jesus, Vince, your own wife. My wife made her choice when she decided to exclude me from real family. Now she gets to experience the consequences of that decision. The evidence Vince referenced was real. He'd been documenting Miranda's activities for months, creating a comprehensive record of her deception. But he'd also been careful to ensure that evidence told a specific story, one that painted Miranda as a willing conspirator rather than a victim. As he prepared for bed that night, Vince reflected on the progress of his operation. In less than 24 hours, he dismantled a criminal network, destroyed his wife's affair, and positioned both Bradley and Miranda for federal prosecution. But this was only the beginning. The real revenge, the part that would teach them both the true cost of betraying Vincent Rodriguez, was still to come. Tomorrow, the door would really start shaking. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. Monday morning brought the kind of gray, drizzling weather that perfectly matched Miranda's emotional state. She'd spent the night alternating between hysterical crying and frantic phone calls to attorneys, none of whom were particularly optimistic about her situation. Vince found her in the kitchen at 6 a.m., surrounded by legal documents and empty tissues, looking like someone who'd been awake for days. The lawyer says I could be looking at 10 years, she said without looking up. 10 years, Vincent, for trusting the wrong person. You didn't just trust the wrong person, Vince replied, pouring himself coffee with steady hands. You planned to steal $400,000 from our marriage to fund a new life with that person. There's a significant difference. Miranda flinched as if he'd slapped her. I was going to tell you everything after. After what? After you'd successfully defrauded me? After you'd established yourself financially with your lover? When exactly were you planning to be honest? Before Miranda could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Bradley's number, and she answered with desperate relief. Bradley, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all night. We need to figure out how to handle this together. Shut up and listen. Bradley's voice cut through her hope like a blade. My lawyer says the only way I avoid federal prison is if I cooperate fully with the investigation. That means providing evidence about everyone involved in the operation. But I'm not involved in any operation. You're just what? An innocent victim? Miranda, you agreed to invest $400,000 in a project without doing any due diligence. You met with me dozens of times to discuss financial strategies. You withdrew money and prepared to transfer it against your husband's interests. Any prosecutor will paint you as a co-conspirator. Vince listened to the conversation through Miranda's phone speaker, admiring Bradley's complete abandonment of any pretense of affection. The man was revealing his true nature under pressure, selfish, calculating, and absolutely ruthless when his own interests were threatened. Unless, Bradley continued, you want to make this easier for both of us. What do you mean? My lawyer thinks we can paint this as a crime of passion. You were an unhappy housewife, manipulated by an older, more sophisticated criminal. You were a victim of my psychological manipulation, not a willing participant. But that only works if you're willing to testify against me. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Vince could see Miranda processing the implications. Testify against Bradley and potentially avoid prison, or maintain their relationship and face federal prosecution together. You're asking me to destroy you to save myself, she finally said. I'm asking you to be smart. This isn't some romantic movie, Miranda. This is federal prison. Choose carefully. The line went dead. Miranda stared at her phone, then at Vince, then at the legal documents scattered across the table. For the first time since this began, she seemed to fully grasp that her fairy tale romance had transformed into a nightmare with no easy escape. Vincent, she said quietly, I need your help. To do what? To figure out how to survive this. You're the smartest person I know. You understand strategy. You understand how systems work. I know I don't deserve your help, but you're asking anyway. Vince set down his coffee and studied his wife with cold assessment. Miranda, you've spent the last 6 months planning to betray me in the most comprehensive way possible. You've stolen money, lied repeatedly, planned to abandon our marriage, and excluded me from real family. Now you want my help because your backup plan collapsed? I made mistakes. You made choices. Deliberate, calculated choices. The only mistake you made was underestimating how thoroughly those choices would destroy your life. At 9 a.m., Agent Mitchell called to inform Miranda that she needed to come in for additional questioning. The FBI had recovered communications between Bradley and his associates that mentioned her by name, and they needed clarification about her role in the conspiracy. Miranda looked at Vince with something approaching panic. Will you come with me? As my husband? Even if it's just for support. Vince considered the request. In his military career, he'd learned that sometimes the most devastating attacks came from unexpected directions. Miranda was expecting him to either abandon her completely or provide unconditional support. Neither response would teach her the lesson she needed to learn. I'll drive you to the federal building, he said finally. But Miranda, understand something clearly. You're going to face the consequences of your choices. I'm not going to save you from them. The drive to the federal building was conducted in silence, Miranda staring out the window while Vince navigated traffic with the same calm precision he brought to everything else. At a red light, she finally spoke. Do you hate me? Hate is an emotion, Vince replied. What I feel for you is much colder than hate. What does that mean? It means you've taught me that the person I thought I married never actually existed. The woman I loved, the woman I built a life with, the woman I trusted completely. She was a fiction. You show me exactly who you really are when you think you can get away with betrayal. People make mistakes, Vincent. People can change. Some mistakes are forgivable. Some aren't. When you decided I wasn't real family, you crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. They pulled up to the federal building, where Agent Mitchell was waiting. As Miranda got out of the car, she turned back to Vince with an expression of desperate hope. Will you be here when I get out? Vince looked at his wife, at the woman who'd shared his bed for 15 years, who'd planned birthday parties and holiday celebrations, who'd sworn to honor and cherish him until death do them part, and felt absolutely nothing. That depends, he said, on whether you finally decide to tell the truth about everything you've done. As Miranda walked into the federal building, escorted by agents who would spend the next several hours documenting her crimes, Vince made a phone call that would determine the final phase of his revenge. Tommy, it's time for the last act. Our friend Bradley thinks he's running to Mexico to escape justice. I want you to ensure he receives a proper education about the consequences of his choices before the federal marshals find him. Copy that. Any specific parameters? Nothing permanent. But I want him to understand exactly what happens to people who destroy other people's families. Make it memorable. Roger. Anything else? Yes. When Miranda gets home tonight, she's going to find divorce papers and an eviction notice. Make sure everything is legally bulletproof. I want her to understand that betrayal has consequences that extend far beyond federal prosecution. And if she doesn't cooperate with the proceedings? Vince thought about the 23 people he'd cooked for, the 3 days of preparation for a celebration that never happened, and the text message that had ended his marriage. Then she'll discover that federal prison might actually be safer than dealing with me directly. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. By the time Miranda returned from her FBI interview at 6 p.m., her world had fundamentally shifted. The federal agents had presented her with evidence that painted her not as Bradley's victim, but as a willing co-conspirator who had helped plan and finance a criminal enterprise. They had recordings of her discussing investment strategies. They had evidence of her accessing her inheritance specifically to fund Bradley's operation. Most damaging of all, they had recovered text messages where she'd encouraged Bradley to be creative about documentation requirements and not worry about bureaucratic red tape. Messages she'd sent thinking she was being supportive of her lover's business acumen. Messages that now read like criminal conspiracy to defraud. She opened the front door of her house, expecting to find Vince waiting with sympathy, or at least familiar surroundings that might provide some comfort. Instead, she found a man in an expensive suit sitting at her kitchen table, reviewing documents with the methodical precision of someone conducting business. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, standing as she entered. "I'm attorney Robert Hayes. Your husband has retained my services for certain legal matters that require immediate attention." Miranda looked around frantically for Vince, but the house felt different, colder, more formal, like a business office rather than a home. "Where's Vincent?" "Mr. Rodriguez is conducting other business this evening. He asked me to review these documents with you and ensure you understand your legal situation." Hayes spread papers across the table with the same clinical efficiency the FBI agents had used. But these weren't criminal evidence. They were divorce papers, asset division agreements, and a restraining order that would prevent Miranda from accessing their joint accounts or remaining in their shared home. "I don't understand," Miranda said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vincent said he would help me." "Mr. Rodriguez is helping you," Hayes replied. "He's ensuring that his own legal exposure is minimized before your federal case proceeds to trial. These documents protect both of you from additional criminal liability related to your financial activities." The divorce papers were thorough and unforgiving. Vince was claiming adultery and criminal misconduct as grounds for dissolution. He was seeking to protect all marital assets from seizure related to Miranda's federal charges. He was requesting that Miranda bear full responsibility for any legal costs related to her criminal defense. Most crushingly, he was seeking to prevent her from claiming any spousal privilege or community property rights that might complicate her prosecution. "This is all standard procedure," Hayes explained with professional detachment. "When one spouse faces federal charges related to fraud, the other spouse must protect themselves legally and financially. But I haven't been charged with anything yet. Mrs. Rodriguez, based on the evidence I've reviewed, criminal charges are inevitable. The only question is whether you'll cooperate with federal prosecutors to minimize your sentence or attempt to fight charges that will almost certainly result in conviction." That's when Miranda's phone rang with a call for Bradley. This time, his voice was different, strained, frightened, and speaking quickly as if he was afraid of being overheard. "Miranda, listen carefully. I'm in serious trouble. Some people came to see me tonight, and they weren't federal agents. They knew things about me, about my past, about operations I ran years ago. They said they were sent by someone who doesn't appreciate people who destroy families." Miranda felt ice forming in her stomach. "What kind of people?" "Professionals. Military types. They didn't hurt me, but they made it very clear that running away wasn't going to solve my problems. They said I had two choices: turn myself into the feds and accept responsibility for everything I've done, or face consequences that would make federal prison look like a vacation. Bradley, who were they working for? I think your husband is a lot more dangerous than either of us realized. The call ended abruptly, leaving Miranda staring at her phone while Attorney Hayes continued his methodical review of her legal destruction. Mrs. Rodriguez, I need you to understand something very clearly, Hayes said, his voice taking on a tone of professional concern. Your husband has documentation of your activities dating back 6 months. Bank records, surveillance photos, recorded conversations, detailed timelines of your relationship with Mr. Thornton. This evidence will be made available to federal prosecutors if it becomes necessary to protect Mr. Rodriguez's interests. He was spying on me? He was protecting himself from criminal liability related to your activities. Mr. Rodriguez suspected you were engaged in financial misconduct and took appropriate steps to document your actions for potential legal proceedings. Miranda felt the walls closing in from every direction. The federal government thought she was a criminal. Bradley was planning to testify against her to reduce his own sentence. And her husband, the man she'd assumed would be devastated by her betrayal, had apparently been building a case against her for months. What does Vincent want from me? She asked. Full cooperation with federal prosecutors. Complete honesty about your activities with Mr. Thornton. Acceptance of responsibility for your criminal conduct. An agreement to these divorce terms without contest or delay. And if I don't agree? Hayes paused in his document review and looked at Miranda with the kind of clinical assessment usually reserved for laboratory specimens. Mrs. Rodriguez, your husband spent 20 years in military intelligence. He specialized in psychological operations and hostile interrogation resistance. He has contacts throughout law enforcement, federal agencies, and private security organizations. He has documented every aspect of your criminal conspiracy in detail. Hayes let that information settle before continuing. If you attempt to fight the divorce, implicate him in your criminal activities, or make this process more difficult than necessary, he will ensure that federal prosecutors have access to evidence that will guarantee your conviction on the most serious charges possible. You will face maximum sentences, maximum penalties, and maximum consequences. But I'm his wife. You were his wife when you decided he wasn't real family. You were his wife when you planned to steal $400,000 from your marriage. You were his wife when you spent 3 days cooking for 23 people, then excluded him from your birthday celebration. Hayes gathered his documents with practiced efficiency. Mr. Rodriguez asked me to remind you of something. In his military career, he learned that some enemies can be negotiated with, some can be contained, and some must be completely eliminated. You chose which category you belong in when you sent that text message. As Attorney Hayes left, Miranda found herself alone in a house that no longer felt like home, holding divorce papers that would strip away everything she'd taken for granted, facing federal charges that could destroy her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The door is shaking because everything you built on lies is finally collapsing. You wanted to know about real family? Now you'll learn that real family doesn't betray each other for money and sexual gratification. Miranda called Vince's number, but it went straight to voicemail. She called his office, but they said he was unavailable. She drove to places she thought he might be, but found nothing. Vincent Rodriguez had vanished from her life as completely as if he'd never existed, leaving behind only the systematic destruction of everything she'd thought was secure. The door wasn't just shaking, it was being torn off its hinges. Chapter 8. Complete Collapse. Tuesday morning brought Miranda's world crashing down with the efficiency of a controlled demolition. She woke up in what had been her marital bed, surrounded by legal documents that detailed the complete dismantling of her life, only to discover that her phone had been buzzing all night with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The first voicemail was from Agent Mitchell. Mrs. Rodriguez, we need to speak immediately. New evidence has emerged that significantly changes your legal situation. The second was from her attorney. Miranda, call me urgently. The federal prosecutors are moving faster than expected. The third was from her bank. Mrs. Rodriguez, your accounts have been frozen pending federal investigation. And the fourth was from a number she didn't recognize, with a message that chilled her to the bone. This is Bradley. They got me. I'm in federal custody. My lawyer says the only way I can reduce my sentence is to provide complete testimony about all co-conspirators. I'm sorry, but I have to tell them everything. Miranda stumbled to her kitchen to find that even her coffee maker had been removed. In fact, as she looked around more carefully, she realized that most of the house's contents were gone. Furniture, electronics, artwork, even kitchen appliances. Everything that could be claimed as Vince's separate property or jointly owned assets that might be subject to federal seizure had been systematically removed. A note on the counter explained the situation in Vince's precise handwriting. All marital assets are being secured to prevent federal seizure related to your criminal activities. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Your personal clothing and effects are packed in the garage. Miranda called Vince's number repeatedly, but each call went straight to a voicemail message that was coldly professional. This is Vincent Rodriguez. I'm not taking calls related to ongoing federal investigations or divorce proceedings. All communication should be directed through my attorney. By 10 a.m., Miranda was sitting in her lawyer's office, learning that her situation had deteriorated overnight beyond what anyone had predicted. The prosecutors are offering a plea deal, her attorney explained, but it's harsh. Conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and criminal enterprise charges. They want 12 years, full restitution, and your complete cooperation in testifying against other members of the network. 12 years. Miranda, they have evidence that goes back months. They have recordings of you discussing financial strategies with Bradley. They have documentation of your knowledge about the fraudulent nature of his investments. They have evidence that you were planning to use your inheritance to expand the criminal operation. But I didn't know it was criminal. That's not what the evidence shows. Your husband provided them with surveillance recordings that capture you discussing ways to avoid bureaucratic oversight and streamline regulatory requirements for Bradley's development projects. Any jury will interpret that as evidence of criminal intent. Miranda felt the room spinning around her. Vincent recorded me extensively. The federal prosecutors describe it as some of the most comprehensive documentation of a criminal conspiracy they've ever seen. Your husband apparently documented every meeting, every phone call, every financial transaction for months. That afternoon, Miranda learned the full extent of Vince's preparation when Agent Mitchell arrived at her lawyer's office with a complete summary of the federal case. Mrs. Rodriguez, we now have testimony from 3 of Mr. Thornton's former associates. They describe a coordinated network that specialized in targeting married women with significant assets. Your case fits the pattern perfectly. Isolation from spouse, financial manipulation, romantic attachment used to facilitate fraud. Agent Mitchell spread photos across the table. Surveillance images that showed Miranda and Bradley together at restaurants, hotels, and planning meetings. But these weren't blurry, distant shots. They were clear, detailed photographs that captured conversations, documents, and intimate moments with professional precision. Your husband provided us with these images as evidence of your criminal association with Mr. Thornton. He also provided audio recordings of your discussions about using your inheritance to fund Mr. Thornton's operations. Miranda stared at the photos, realizing that Vince had been watching her for months. Every romantic dinner, every private conversation, every moment she'd thought was secret had been documented with military precision. However, Agent Mitchell continued, your husband has also provided evidence that might support a different narrative. He recorded conversations where Mr. Thornton specifically coached you on how to avoid involving your husband in financial decisions. There's documentation of Mr. Thornton isolating you from your support system and manipulating your emotional vulnerabilities. What does that mean? It means you have a choice. Accept responsibility for willingly participating in a criminal conspiracy, or cooperate fully with our investigation by testifying that you were manipulated and defrauded by Mr. Thornton and his associates. And if I testify against Bradley? Reduced charges. possibly probation instead of prison. But you'll have to provide complete testimony about everything. The affair, the financial planning, the criminal conspiracy, everything you know about Mr. Thornton's operation. That evening, Miranda sat in her empty house, surrounded by boxes containing the remnants of her life, trying to process the full scope of her situation. Her marriage was over. Her savings were frozen. Her lover was planning to testify against her. And her husband, the man she'd betrayed and dismissed as not real family, had orchestrated the complete destruction of her world with surgical precision. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vince. You have until Friday to decide whether you want to cooperate with federal prosecutors or face trial on maximum charges. Choose carefully. This is the last decision you'll get to make independently for quite some time. Miranda called the number, but it was already disconnected. She realized then that Vincent Rodriguez hadn't just documented her betrayal. He'd orchestrated her complete destruction while giving her every opportunity to incriminate herself further. He'd played her and Bradley against each other, turned their criminal conspiracy into federal evidence, and positioned himself as the wronged husband who tried to save his marriage despite his wife's criminal activities. The door wasn't just shaking anymore. It had been blown completely off its hinges, and Miranda was standing in the wreckage of everything she'd thought was secure, facing a choice between betraying her lover or facing decades in federal prison. Either way, Vincent Rodriguez had won completely. Chapter 9. Aftermath. 6 months later, Vincent Rodriguez sat in his new downtown apartment, reading the morning newspaper's coverage of the federal fraud trial that had concluded the previous day. The headline read, Romance Fraud Network Dismantled, 23 Defendants Convicted. Miranda had ultimately chosen to cooperate with federal prosecutors, testifying against Bradley and his associates in exchange for a reduced sentence of 2 years plus restitution. Bradley himself had received 15 years after attempting to flee the country and refusing to provide substantial assistance to the investigation. Vince folded the newspaper and set it aside. The criminal proceedings were just one element of his comprehensive victory. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, with Miranda receiving nothing beyond her personal effects and a substantial debt for legal fees. The house had been sold, with all proceeds going to Vince as the wrong party in the dissolution. More satisfying than the financial victory was the complete destruction of Miranda's social standing. Her cooperation with federal prosecutors had required her to detail every aspect of her affair, her financial planning with Bradley, and her deliberate deception of her husband. The testimony had been public record, covered extensively by local media, and had effectively ended any possibility of Miranda rebuilding her life in their community. Vince's phone rang with a call from Detective Morrison. Vince, thought you'd want to know. Your boy Bradley had a rough time in federal lockup while he was awaiting trial. Apparently someone spread word about his romance fraud operation, and the other inmates didn't appreciate anyone who targeted vulnerable women. He requested protective custody after the 3rd incident. Unfortunate. Vince replied with complete neutrality. Also, the feds want me to thank you again for the intelligence that broke this case open. That network was operating in 12 states and had defrauded nearly 200 women over 8 years. Your documentation was the key to dismantling the entire operation. After ending the call, Vince walked to his window overlooking the city. He'd rebuilt his life with the same methodical precision he'd applied to destroying his enemies. New apartment, new consulting contracts, new social circles that appreciated his intelligence and integrity while knowing nothing about his capacity for ruthless revenge. His doorbell rang, and Vince opened it to find Miranda standing in the hallway. She looked older, worn down by months of legal proceedings and the reality of her situation. She was scheduled to begin her prison sentence the following week. Vincent, I know you don't want to see me, but I needed to say something before. Come in, he said, stepping aside. Miranda entered his apartment tentatively, looking around at the space he'd created without her. It was stylish, comfortable, and completely devoid of any trace of their shared history. I wanted to apologize, she said. Not because I think it will change anything, but because you deserve to hear it. I destroyed our marriage, I betrayed your trust, and I treated you like you didn't matter. I was wrong about everything. Vince studied his former wife with the same clinical detachment he'd maintained throughout their destruction. She was telling the truth now, but it was far too late for honesty to matter. Miranda, do you understand what you actually did? I cheated on you. I lied to you. I planned to steal money from our marriage. Those were just the symptoms. What you actually did was prove that 15 years of marriage meant nothing to you. You demonstrated that when you thought you could get away with it, you were willing to betray everything we'd built together. Miranda's eyes filled with tears. I know I can't fix it. I know I can't earn your forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I understand what I lost. What you lost, Vince replied, was the protection and security that came from being married to someone who honored his commitments. You gambled that security on a criminal who saw you as nothing more than a convenient source of money. I was stupid. I was selfish. You were exactly who you chose to be when you thought the consequences didn't matter. Vince walked to his desk and retrieved a manila envelope. Before you begin your prison sentence, there's something you should understand about the man you threw away your marriage for. He handed her the envelope, which contained photographs and documents that painted a comprehensive picture of Bradley's criminal history. Your lover wasn't just running romance frauds. He was trafficking drugs through his real estate operations. He was laundering money for organized crime. He was involved in identity theft networks across 5 states. Miranda stared at the evidence, her face growing pale. If you had succeeded in your plan to leave me for Bradley, you wouldn't have become his partner in a legitimate business. You would have become an accessory to major criminal enterprises that would have destroyed your life far more completely than anything you're facing now. You knew all this? I discovered it during my investigation. Bradley wasn't just targeting you for your inheritance. He was planning to use you as a front for money laundering operations. Your legitimate background and clean financial history would have made you the perfect, unwitting accomplice for federal crimes that carry 20-year minimum sentences. Vince let that information settle before continuing. Miranda, you didn't just betray our marriage for another man. You betrayed our marriage for a criminal who was planning to destroy your life far more thoroughly than I ever could. Miranda sat down heavily, finally understanding the full scope of what she'd almost walked into. So you saved me? No, I saved myself. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't real family. Everything that happened after that was simply the logical consequence of that decision. Miranda stood to leave, then turned back one final time. Do you hate me now? Vince considered the question with the same analytical precision he brought to everything else. Hate requires emotional investment. You're simply a problem I solved, Miranda. Nothing more than that. After she left, Vince returned to his window, overlooking the city. In the distance, he could see the federal courthouse where Miranda would report next week to begin serving her sentence. He felt no satisfaction in her punishment, no regret about her fate, no lingering attachment to the woman who'd shared his life for 15 years. Vincent Rodriguez had learned that some betrayals were so complete they burn away every trace of love, leaving behind only the cold satisfaction of perfect justice. His phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Webb. New client wants to hire the team for a similar operation. Husband suspected wife of fraud conspiracy. Interested, Vince deleted the message without responding. He'd served his country for 20 years and defended his marriage for 15. Now, for the first time in his adult life, Vincent Rodriguez answered to no one but himself. The door had finished shaking. Everything built on lies had collapsed. And in the rubble of that destruction, Vince had built something new, a life where betrayal was impossible because trust was no longer required. He opened his laptop and began researching property investments in Costa Rica. It was time to disappear completely, leaving behind a city full of people who would remember Vincent Rodriguez as the man who destroyed a criminal network and survived his wife's betrayal with his integrity intact. None of them would ever know how dangerous it was to betray someone who knew exactly how to make enemies disappear forever. The story was complete. The revenge was perfect. The consequences were permanent. And Vincent Rodriguez was finally absolutely free. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Call. Jarrett Bolton had written 17 psychological thrillers in his career. He knew every twist, every manipulation, every way a seemingly perfect life could shatter in an instant. Yet nothing he'd crafted on paper had prepared him for this moment. The Colorado highway stretched ahead, mountain peaks turning purple in the dying light. Leslie sat beside him in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone with that familiar crease between her eyebrows that appeared whenever she dealt with work emails. 10 years of marriage had taught him to read that expression. Her marketing firm had landed a major client, and she was already strategizing. "You're doing it again," Jarrett said, keeping his tone light. "Doing what?" She didn't look up. "Working on vacation." We agreed. His phone erupted with a shrill ring, the emergency tone he'd set for unknown numbers. Jarrett frowned, putting it on speaker while keeping his eyes on the road. "Mr. Bolton?" A grave male voice. "Official. This is Officer Wade Lang with the Colorado State Police." "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" "Sir, I need to verify some information. Is your wife's name Leslie Curtis Bolton?" Jarrett's stomach tightened. Beside him, Leslie finally looked up from her phone. "Yes, that's correct. Why do you ask that?" A pause. Heavy. Weighted with something terrible. "Sir, there's no easy way to say this. United Flight 447 from Dallas to Denver crashed approximately 90 minutes ago in the San Juan Mountains. There were no survivors. Your wife's body was identified through dental records 45 minutes ago." The world tilted. Jarrett's hands tightened on the wheel, his mind racing through possibilities, explanations, anything that made sense. Beside him, Leslie had gone still, her face pale. "Officer," Jarrett said, his voice remarkably steady despite the ice flooding his veins. "That's impossible." "Sir, I understand this is shocking." "No, you don't understand. My wife is sitting right next to me. We've been driving together for the past 3 hours. Silence. Then, "Mr. Bolton, what did you just say?" "My wife is in the car with me. Right now. We're on Highway 285, about 30 miles outside of Denver." The officer's voice changed, losing its sympathy and gaining an edge of alarm. "Sir, stop the car immediately. Right now. Pull over." "What? What?" "Sir, stop the car. If there's someone in that vehicle claiming to be your wife, whoever that person is, that's not your wife. Leslie Bolton died in that crash. Her body is in the morgue." Jarrett's blood turned to ice water. His eyes slid sideways. The woman beside him was already looking at him, and she was smiling. Not Leslie's smile. Not the warm, slightly crooked grin he'd fallen in love with. This was something else entirely. Something cold and calculated and utterly alien. "Jarrett," she said softly, reaching toward the phone. "Hang up." He jerked the wheel right, tires screeching as he pulled onto the shoulder. His mind was already working, cataloging details he should have noticed. The subtle differences in mannerisms. The way she'd held her fork at the restaurant. The unfamiliar perfume he'd chalked up to try something new. How long had Leslie been gone? Since Dallas? Before? "Mr. Bolton?" "Mr. Bolton." The officer's voice crackled through the speaker. The woman, not Leslie, his mind screamed, reached out and disconnected the call with a single smooth motion. "I'm impressed," she said, her voice dropping the slight Texas lilt Leslie had never quite lost. "Most people take longer to figure it out." Jarrett didn't move, didn't breathe. He'd written scenes like this 100 times. The key was staying calm, gathering information, looking for the angle. In his novels, the protagonist always had a plan. But this wasn't a novel. This was real. And Leslie, his Leslie, was dead. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Does it matter? What matters is what happens next, Jarrett. And trust me, you're going to want to cooperate. Because if you don't..." She pulled something from her purse. His heart stopped. A gun. Small, silver, deadly. "You'll join the real Leslie much sooner than planned." Jarrett's mind raced. The highway was empty in both directions. His phone was between them, but she was watching him like a hawk. In the rearview mirror, the mountains loomed, indifferent to the nightmare unfolding in this car. He'd spent his entire career writing about ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, about protagonists who refused to break, who found reserves of strength they never knew existed. Now it was his turn. "What do you want?" he asked. Her smile widened. "Keep driving. We're going home, and you're going to pretend everything is perfect. Because, Jarrett, the show is just beginning." He put the car in gear, his hands steady on the wheel. But behind his calm exterior, a different Jarrett was awakening. Not the best-selling author, not the loving husband, the Jarrett Bolton from before the success, before the safety, the kid who'd survived foster homes and street fights, who'd clawed his way up from nothing. That Jarrett had been sleeping for a decade. Not anymore. As he pulled back onto the highway, Jarrett began a plan. Chapter 2, The Ghost. Jarrett drove on autopilot, his mind splitting into parallel tracks. Track 1, immediate survival. Track 2, gathering intelligence. Track 3, planning 3 moves ahead, the way he'd learned when survival wasn't a metaphor. The woman kept the gun low but visible, resting against her thigh. Professional. Trained. This wasn't some crime of passion or improvised scheme. "What should I call you?" Jarrett asked, keeping his voice conversational. "Since you're not Leslie." She studied him with predatory interest. "Angelica will do. Angelica Alvarado. Not that you'll need the name for long. You're going to kill me. Eventually." She said it like commenting on the weather. "But not yet. First, you need to serve your purpose." Jarrett filed that away. Purpose meant a plan. A plan meant other players. Whose idea was this? Does it matter? It does if I'm going to die anyway. Call it a writer's curiosity. Angelica laughed, genuinely amused. "I was told you'd be smart. That's why the plan had to be perfect." She gestured with the gun. "Turn right at the next exit. We're taking the back way." As Jarrett followed her directions through increasingly isolated roads, he let his mind drift back. Not to Leslie. That pain was too raw, too devastating to touch yet. Instead, to his own history, the foundation he'd built his life upon. Jarrett Bolton, born Jarrett Cole. Mother died when he was 6. Father never in the picture. Foster care from 6 to 16. Fought his way through it all. Learned to read people. Learned when to fight and when to disappear. Got his GED. Then worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college. Found he had a gift for words, for understanding the dark corners of human nature. His first novel, The Nowhere Man, had been semi-autobiographical. A protagonist who existed in society's cracks. Invisible until he chose not to be. It had struck a nerve, launched his career. 14 more books followed, each dissecting the psychology of predator and prey. And through it all, Leslie had been there. They'd met at a book signing 8 years ago. She'd walked up with a worn copy of his 3rd novel, told him she'd read it 5 times, trying to understand her abusive ex Jarrett had offered to buy her coffee. 3 months later, they were engaged. She'd been his light, his proof that life could be more than survival. And now she was gone. Left here, Angelica commanded. They turned onto a gravel road, trees closing in overhead. Jarrett's house was another 5 miles through these woods. He'd chosen the location for privacy. Now, that isolation was a liability. "You're doing better than expected," Angelica observed. "Most people would be crying, panicking. You're too calm. Would you prefer hysterics?" "I prefer honesty." "You're planning something." Jarrett allowed himself a small smile. "Of course I am. Question is whether you care. Smart man knows when he's beaten. Smart man knows there's always an angle." He pulled into his driveway, the house dark ahead. "Let me guess, you've been here before. You know the layout. Probably planted evidence, maybe surveillance equipment." Angelica's silence was answer enough. Jarrett cut the engine, sitting in the sudden quiet. "Whose revenge am I part of? Because this is revenge, not money. Too elaborate, too personal. Someone I wronged? Exposed in a book? You'll find out soon enough." Out of the car, slowly, as Jarrett stepped into the cool evening air, his phone buzzed. Angelica snatched it from his hand, glancing at the screen. Her expression darkened. Officer Lang again. Persistent. She powered it off, pocketed it. Inside. Now, the house felt wrong. Jarrett noticed it immediately. Small things out of place. A book turned the wrong way. His office chair adjusted to a different height. Angelica, or someone else, had been here, living his life, preparing for this moment. How long? He asked as she directed him to the living room. How long has the real Leslie been gone? 3 days. The switch happened in Dallas at her hotel. Quick injection, out the service entrance, onto the plane with her ID and ticket. I took her place at the conference, answered her calls, played the devoted wife. Angelica settled into Leslie's favorite chair. No, not Leslie's anymore. You almost noticed at dinner tonight. I saw it in your eyes. She was right. There had been a moment when Leslie, Angelica, had ordered wine instead of whiskey. A tiny deviation, but it had nagged at him. So, the plan is what? I'm found dead in my house, grieving widower's suicide after losing his wife in a crash. Close. Murder-suicide, actually. Turns out you killed her before she left, put her on that plane to cover it up. But guilt overwhelmed you. They'll find evidence, her blood in your office, your searches for how to cause plane crashes, financial motive, insurance payout. Angelica's smile was razor sharp. Your readers will eat it up. The thriller writer who became his own villain. It was elegant, Jarrett admitted grudgingly. Frame him posthumously. Destroy his legacy along with his life. This wasn't just about killing him, it was about annihilation, which meant whoever orchestrated this hated him personally. Vincent Brennan, Jarrett said quietly. Angelica's expression flickered, surprise, annoyance. He said you were smart. Vincent, of course. The failed writer who'd accused Jarrett of stealing his manuscript 7 years ago. Jarrett had never even seen a manuscript, but Vincent's lawyer had made noise, filed suit. It was dismissed within weeks. No evidence, no basis. But Vincent had never let it go. At every book tour, every interview, Vincent would appear, posting online rants, sending threatening letters. Jarrett had gotten restraining orders, but Vincent always found ways around them. And now Vincent had found the ultimate revenge. Where is he? Jarrett asked. Somewhere you'll never reach. Angelica stood, raising the gun. Enough conversation. Time to... A sound from outside. Gravel crunching. Car doors. Angelica's head whipped toward the window. What did you... Officer Lang must have traced my phone, Jarrett said calmly, though his heart hammered. Or maybe the cell tower ping. They know I was heading here. Red and blue lights flickered through the curtains. For one precious second, Angelica was distracted, weighing options. Jarrett moved. He was across the room before she could react, knocking the gun from her hand. It skittered across the hardwood. They crashed into the bookshelf together, novels tumbling down around them. Jarrett pinned her wrist, but she was strong, trained, dangerous. Police! Mr. Bolton! Angelica's knee caught his ribs. Pain exploded through his chest. She twisted free, lunging for the gun. The door burst open. Officers poured in, weapons drawn. Freeze! Angelica froze, hand inches from the pistol. Jarrett rolled away, gasping. Officer Lang stepped forward, older than Jarrett expected, with steel-gray hair and hard eyes. Mr. Bolton, step away from her. As Jarrett stumbled back, as Angelica was forced to the ground and cuffed, as the machinery of law enforcement kicked into gear, one thought crystallized in his mind. This wasn't over. Angelica was just the weapon. Vincent Brennan was the hand that wielded it, and Jarrett was going to make him pay, not with lawyers or restraining orders this time. Vincent had killed Leslie, destroyed her, framed her death as part of a sick game. The old Jarrett Bolton, the survivor, the fighter, he had work to do. Chapter 3. The Investigation. The interrogation room at Denver Police Headquarters smelled like bad coffee and desperation. Jarrett sat across from Officer Lang and his partner, a sharp-eyed detective named Tanya Livingston, who specialized in homicides that didn't fit normal patterns. Walk me through it again, Livingston said, her voice deceptively gentle. Everything from the phone call to when we arrived. Jarrett had been through it 4 times already. Each retelling was consistent, controlled. He knew they were looking for cracks, contradictions. Standard procedure when the husband survives and the wife doesn't. The real question, Jarrett said, meeting her gaze directly, is whether you verified my wife's death, found evidence at my house, and connected Angelica Alvarado to Vincent Brennan. Lang shifted. We're asking the questions, Mr. Bolton, and I've answered them multiple times. While Vincent Brennan is out there, free, celebrating the fact that he murdered my wife. We have Alvarado in custody, Livingston said. She's not talking, lawyered up immediately. But we did find something interesting. She slid a photograph across the table. Recognize this? It was a still from surveillance footage, slightly grainy. Vincent Brennan, looking thinner than Jarrett remembered, standing outside a small theater in what appeared to be downtown Denver. The timestamp was dated 6 months ago. That's the Starlight Theater, Jarrett said. Community playhouse, where Angelica Alvarado was performing in a production of Othello. Livingston continued. She played Desdemona. Vincent attended every show. They met afterward. Coffee turned into dinners, dinners into late nights at his apartment. Jarrett's hands clenched. Vincent had recruited her, groomed her for this. How long had he been planning? What else? Jarrett demanded. Lang and Livingston exchanged glances. Finally, Lang spoke. Your wife's body. The identification was preliminary, based on the passenger manifest and some jewelry. But dental records matched. It's definitely her. The words hit like bullets. Part of Jarrett had held on a hope, some irrational belief that maybe it was all an elaborate hoax. But no, Leslie was gone. I need to see him, Jarrett said quietly. I need to see Brennan. That's not possible, Livingston said. You're technically still a person of interest. I'm the victim here. Jarrett's control slipped, voice rising. My wife was murdered. I was nearly killed. You have the person who held me at gunpoint. You have motive connecting her to Brennan. What more do you need? Evidence, Lang said flatly. Solid, prosecutable evidence. Right now, we have Alvarado on assault charges. But she's claiming she was hired as an actress for what she thought was an elaborate prank, got scared when you discovered the truth, and panicked. Her lawyer will argue diminished capacity, manipulation by Brennan. Without proof, he orchestrated the plane crash. There was a plane crash. Leslie died. The crash was mechanical failure, Livingston said gently. Hydraulic system malfunction. NTSB is investigating, but preliminary reports show no signs of sabotage. It could have been tragic coincidence that Brennan exploited. Jarrett stared at them, understanding dawning. You can't prove he caused it, so you can't prove murder conspiracy. Not yet, Lang admitted, but we're building a case. Financial records, communications between Brennan and Alvarado, your history with him. It takes time. Time Vincent would use to disappear, cover his tracks, or worse, complete his plan. Jarrett stood abruptly. Am I free to go? For now. Don't leave town. And Mr. Bolton? Livingston's voice stopped him at the door. I know what you're thinking. Don't. Let us handle this. Jarrett didn't respond. He simply walked out. The November air was cold as Jarrett emerged from the police station. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that Leslie would have loved. She'd always been an early riser, dragging him out of bed to watch sunrises from their deck. Never again. His phone, returned by the police, buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I know you want to talk. Meet me. Details to follow. Vincent. Taunting him. Daring him. Jarrett's jaw tightened. The police wanted evidence. Fine. He'd get them evidence. But not through legal channels. Not through waiting for bureaucracy to turn its wheels. He pulled out his laptop from the car and drove to a nearby diner, ordering coffee he wouldn't drink. For the next 3 hours, Jarrett Bolton disappeared into research mode. Vincent Brennan, age 41, born in Michigan, moved to Colorado for college, stayed after graduating with an MFA in creative writing, published 2 novels that sold poorly, optioned for film rights that never materialized. Blamed Jarrett for stealing The Vanishing Point, a manuscript Vincent claimed to have sent to the same agent. Jarrett had pulled the files years ago during the lawsuit. Vincent's manuscript and Jarrett's published novel shared exactly 0 plot points, themes, or character elements. The only similarity was the thriller genre. The judge had called Vincent's claim frivolous and potentially defamatory. But Vincent had never let it go. His social media was a shrine to obsession. Jarrett's name mentioned thousands of times, conspiracies about the publishing industry, rants about stolen success. And then, 6 months ago, the post stopped. No more public ranting. No more appearances at book signings. Vincent Brennan had gone quiet because he'd been planning this. Jarrett pulled up property records. Vincent rented a small house in Aurora, worked part-time at a bookstore. Bank records would require a warrant, but Jarrett could access public information. Vincent had no significant assets, no history of mechanical expertise or aviation knowledge. So how had he caused the crash? Or had it really been coincidence, as the police suggested? Jarrett didn't believe in coincidence. Not at this level. His phone buzzed again, Riverside Park. 2 p.m. Come alone. I'll know if you don't. A public place, plenty of witnesses. Vincent was careful, but he also wanted to gloat, to see Jarrett's pain up close. That arrogance was a weakness. Jarrett opened a new document on his laptop. Not a novel this time, but something more important, a plan. In his books, the protagonist always found leverage. Some secret the antagonist couldn't afford exposed. Some pressure point that turned the tables. Jarrett needed to find Vincent's. He started with Angelica, actress, talented enough for community theater. How had Vincent convinced her to commit murder? Money? Manipulation? Love? Jarrett pulled up the Starlight Theater website, found archived cast photos from Othello. There was Angelica, beautiful and poised, and beside her, another actor who looked familiar. Jarrett enlarged the image. His blood went cold. It was Vincent, not in the audience, in the play, listed as playing Iago, the manipulator, the villain who destroyed lives through lies and schemes. Of course, Vincent hadn't just met Angelica at the theater. They performed together. He'd literally played a role about manipulation and revenge, but there was more. Jarrett scrolled through other cast photos, other productions. The theater had put on 6 shows in the past year. Vincent appeared in 4 of them, always supporting roles, always the villain or the schemer. And in 3 of those productions, the director was listed as Dan Lopez. Jarrett pulled up Lopez's information. Former Hollywood stuntman, moved to Denver 5 years ago after a career-ending injury. Specialized in staging realistic fight choreography and practical effects, including, according to his resume, aviation and mechanical consultation for film productions. There it was, the connection. Vincent hadn't sabotaged the plane himself. He'd had help from someone who knew how. Someone who understood hydraulics and systems and how to make a crash look accidental. Jarrett's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling together pieces. Lopez had worked on a film about an airline disaster. He consulted with actual mechanics. He'd know exactly what to do. But why would Lopez help Vincent? Money seemed unlikely. The bookstore job didn't pay enough for a professional hit, which meant Vincent had something else to offer. Jarrett dug deeper into Lopez's background. The injury that ended his Hollywood career, a stunt gone wrong on a set. Lopez had sued the production company and lost. But the director who'd pushed for the dangerous stunt, who'd overruled safety concerns. Jarrett found an old Variety article. His stomach dropped. The director was Saul Stewart, who had optioned one of Jarrett's novels 3 years ago for a film that never got made. Stewart's production company had collapsed after fraud allegations. Stewart blamed Jarrett publicly, claiming the novel's film rights were cursed, that Jarrett had interfered with production. It was nonsense. Jarrett had stayed completely out of the process. But Stewart needed a scapegoat. And Vincent had found that scapegoat a willing ally in Dan Lopez, who already hated Stewart and, by extension, anyone connected to him. The conspiracy was bigger than Jarrett had realized. Vincent had assembled a team, each with their own grudge against Jarrett or his associates. Angelica, Lopez, possibly others, all working together to destroy him. But conspiracies had a weakness. They required trust, and trust could be broken. Jarrett began to smile. It was not a nice expression. He knew exactly how to break them. Chapter 4. The Meeting. Riverside Park stretched along the Platte River, popular with joggers and families despite the November chill. Jarrett arrived 30 minutes early, scanning for surveillance, backup, anything that suggested Vincent wasn't alone. The park was clean. Too clean, which meant Vincent had planned carefully. At precisely 2 p.m., Vincent Brennan appeared, walking down the main path with hands in his pockets. He looked terrible, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes, hair unwashed. But his smile was triumphant. "Jarrett Bolton," Vincent said, sitting on the bench beside him without invitation. "The great novelist. How does it feel to live in one of your own thrillers?" "Where's Lopez?" Jarrett asked quietly. Vincent's smile faltered. "I don't know what." "Dan Lopez. Your director friend from the theater. The one who helped you sabotage Flight 447. Jarrett kept his voice level, conversational. Around them, life continued. Children playing, couples walking dogs. The former stuntman who knows mechanics and hydraulics. "You've been busy," Vincent said after a moment. "But you can't prove anything." "I don't need to. The police will figure out eventually. Right now, they're pulling Lopez's phone records, his financial transactions, his travel history. If he went anywhere near Dallas in the last week, they'll know." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Even if that's true, so what? Angelica won't talk. Lopez won't talk. You have nothing." "I have you," Jarrett said. "Meeting me in public. Being seen together. The police know about your obsession, your history with me. This conversation is painting a target on your back. Or on yours." Vincent leaned back. "You're the grieving widower, remember? Unstable, desperate. If something happens to me, you're the obvious suspect. I've been very careful to document my fear of you. Letters to my lawyer. Emails to friends. A video confession, just in case." It was a good countermove. Jarrett had expected it. "You made a mistake," Jarrett said. "You wanted me to suffer, to be destroyed publicly. But you gave me something you didn't intend." "What's that?" "Time." Jarrett stood. "Time to investigate. Time to think. Time to plan. You see, Vincent, I write thrillers for a living. I understand how plots work, how to build suspense, how to turn the tables in the third act. And I know the one thing you've forgotten." Vincent stood as well, anger flashing across his face. "What?" "The villain always loses." Jarrett walked away, leaving Vincent fuming on the bench. He could feel eyes watching him. Not police, someone else. Vincent's backup, probably Lopez. Let them watch. Phase 1 was complete. Engage the enemy, provoke a response, force mistakes. Now for Phase 2. Jarrett's house was still a crime scene. Yellow tape across the door. He wasn't allowed inside yet, which was fine. He'd rented a hotel room and set up a temporary base of operations. His phone rang. "Officer Lang. Mr. Bolton, we need you to come in again. There's been a development." "What kind of development?" "Dan Lopez was found dead an hour ago. Apparent suicide. Left a note confessing to sabotaging Flight 447, claiming he acted alone." Jarrett's blood went cold. Vincent was tying off loose ends. "That's convenient," Jarrett said. "Too convenient," Lang agreed. "But without Lopez alive, we have no way to verify the confession or connect him to Brennan. Angelica is still refusing to cooperate, and her lawyer is making noise about releasing her on bail. You can't let that happen. We're trying. But unless we get something concrete in the next 48 hours, the DA might not have enough to hold her." Jarrett ended the call, his mind racing. Vincent was accelerating his plan, eliminating witnesses. Lopez's suicide provided a convenient scapegoat and removed someone who could implicate Vincent, which meant Angelica was next. Jarrett had 48 hours to break the conspiracy before Vincent cleaned house completely. He pulled up his laptop and began typing, not a novel, but something that looked like one. A manuscript. The working title, The Collaborators. Chapter 1 began. They thought they'd planned the perfect crime. They were wrong. Jarrett wrote furiously, pouring in every detail he'd uncovered. Vincent's obsession, Angelica's recruitment, Lopez's involvement. But he wrote it as fiction, changing names, adding embellishments. To anyone reading, it would look like his next thriller. But to Vincent, Angelica, and anyone else involved, it would be something else. Proof that Jarrett knew everything. At midnight, Jarrett emailed the manuscript to 6 addresses: his agent, his publisher, 3 writer friends, and 1 dead-drop email address he'd created specifically for this purpose. Then he sent a text to Vincent. "Check your email. You're going to love my new book." He waited. 10 minutes. 20. His phone rang. Vincent, voice shaking with rage. "What the hell is this?" "My next bestseller," Jarrett said calmly. "Or maybe my last. Depends on how this all plays out. You can't publish this. It's defamation. It's fiction," Jarrett interrupted. "Says so right on the title page. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. You know, the standard disclaimer. I'll sue you into oblivion. Then you'll have to prove it's about you, which means admitting to everything in court under oath. Please, Vincent, I'd love to see you try." Silence. Heavy breathing. "What do you want?" Vincent finally asked. "I want my wife back. But since you murdered her, I'll settle for justice." "You'll never prove anything." "I don't have to. That manuscript is already out there in 6 different hands. If something happens to me, it gets published posthumously. Your name, your crimes, all of it becomes public record. Even if you're never convicted, everyone will know. Every book club, every reader, every publisher. You'll be famous, Vincent, just not the way you wanted. You're bluffing." "Am I? Tell me, how did Lopez really die?" "Because I'm betting it wasn't suicide. I'm betting you arranged it, just like you arranged Leslie's death. How many people have to die before you're satisfied?" "Stop. And Angelica? Is she next? Or maybe you're already planning how to eliminate her. She's a liability now, in custody, facing charges. How long before she realizes you're not coming to save her? Before she decides cooperation is better than loyalty?" "She won't talk. Everyone talks eventually, Vincent. It's human nature. Survival instinct. You should know that. You're a writer. Or you were, before your bitterness destroyed any talent you had." The line went dead. Jarrett smiled grimly. Now came the hardest part, waiting for Vincent to make his next move. Chapter 5, The Confession. Angelica Alvarado sat in the county jail, her 3rd day in custody. Bail hearing was tomorrow. Her lawyer was confident. Assault charges, first offense, community ties. She'd be out by noon. Then Vincent would kill her. She knew that now. The realization had come slowly, pieces fitting together in the long hours of isolation. Lopez dead, Jarrett alive and fighting back. Vincent's promises suddenly seeming hollow. She'd been a fool, an actress playing the role of her life, too caught up in the drama to see she was just another prop in Vincent's revenge play. When the guard appeared at her cell, Angelica expected her lawyer. Instead, she was taken to an interrogation room where Detective Livingston waited with Officer Lang and someone new, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an FBI badge. "Ms. Alvarado," the FBI agent said, "my name is Special Agent Grace Warren. I work in domestic terrorism and conspiracy cases. I need to talk to you about Vincent Brennan." "I want my lawyer." "You can have your lawyer. But first, listen to what I have to say." Warren slid a photograph across the table. Dan Lopez, pale and lifeless on a bathroom floor. This was ruled suicide, but we both know Vincent Brennan killed him. Angelica stared at the photo, ball rising in her throat. "You're next," Warren continued. "Maybe not immediately. Maybe Vincent waits until after your bail hearing, until you're out. Maybe he stages an accident, another suicide. But you're a loose end, Ms. Alvarado. And Vincent doesn't leave loose ends." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Warren leaned forward. "You're an actress, a talented one. Vincent recruited you for the performance of your life. Impersonate Leslie Bolton, get close to Jarrett, help frame him for murder. But it's over now. The play is finished, and the director is killing off the cast. That's not. There's more." Warren produced another photograph. This one showed a young woman, blonde, early 20s. Tamara Bond, actress from Chicago, worked with Vincent Brennan 4 years ago on an independent film. She disappeared shortly after the production wrapped. Her body was found 6 months later in a forest preserve. Cause of death was drowning, ruled accidental. Angelica's hands started shaking. "Vincent has a pattern," Warren said. "He uses people, particularly women, to carry out his schemes. And when they're no longer useful, they vanish. Tamara wasn't the first. There was Jody Mills, a journalist who was investigating Vincent's plagiarism claims. She died in a hit-and-run. Bobby Chon, a lawyer who represented the publishing house that rejected Vincent's novels. House fire. That's not possible. We've been building a case against Vincent Brennan for 3 years, Warren said. But he's careful, smart. We couldn't connect him definitively to any of these deaths. Until now. Until he got sloppy with Leslie Bolton. Livingston spoke up. You can walk out of here tomorrow on bail. Go home. Wait for whatever Vincent has planned. Or you can help us. Tell us everything. How he recruited you, what he promised, how he planned Leslie's murder. With your testimony, we can put Vincent away for life. And what happens to me? Angelica whispered. Prison time, probably, Warren admitted. But witness protection, a chance at a life after. You're 28 years old, Ms. Alvarado. You made terrible choices, but you're not a murderer. Not yet. Don't let Vincent turn you into one. Angelica looked at the photographs spread across the table. All those women. All dead. All connected to Vincent. She'd thought he loved her. He'd been so convincing, so passionate in his hatred of Jarrett Bolton. The stolen manuscript, the ruined career, the injustice of it all. Angelica had believed him when he said they were fighting back against corruption, against a system that protected the powerful. But it all been lies. I want full immunity, Angelica said quietly. Warren and Livingston exchanged glances. We'll have to talk to the DA. Full immunity, witness protection, and I want my testimony to be enough to put Vincent away. I'll tell you everything, but I need guarantees. Why should we believe you'll tell the truth? Lang asked. Angelica met his gaze. Because I'm terrified. Because I know Vincent is going to kill me if he gets the chance. Because I helped murder an innocent woman, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But maybe, just maybe, if I help put Vincent away, Leslie Bolton's death won't be completely meaningless. Warren pulled out a recorder. Start from the beginning. Tell us how Vincent Brennan recruited you. Angelica took a breath and began to talk. Jarrett was in his hotel room when Officer Lang called. Mr. Bolton, we got it. Angelica Alvarado is cooperating. She's giving us everything, dates, locations, planning sessions. She's willing to testify that Vincent Brennan orchestrated the entire plot, including the plane's sabotage. Jarrett closed his eyes. What about Dan Lopez's death? She doesn't have direct evidence, but she's giving us enough to reopen that investigation. And there's more. FBI has been tracking Vincent for other suspicious deaths. This goes way beyond Leslie. How soon can you arrest him? We're putting together the warrant now. Should have him in custody by morning. He's going to run. We've got surveillance on his apartment. He's not going anywhere. But Jarrett knew better. Vincent was smart enough to have an escape plan. The moment he realized Angelica had flipped, he'd disappear. I need to do something, Jarrett said. Mr. Bolton, you need to stay out of this. I need closure. He trailed off, an idea forming. Dangerous. Probably stupid. But it might work. What are you thinking? Lang asked suspiciously. Vincent wants to see me suffer. He staged this whole elaborate plot because destroying me was more important than just killing me. So let's give him what he wants. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to give him a target he can't resist. Jarrett pulled up his laptop. I'm going to announce a press conference. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. I'm going to reveal the truth about Leslie's death, about Vincent, about everything. Live-streamed, recorded, completely public. That's insane. If Vincent is the killer you think he is, he won't be able to stay away. He'll have to stop me, or at least see me one last time. And when he shows up, you'll have him. Lang was quiet for a long moment. This is a terrible idea. Do you have a better one? I'll talk to my superiors. But Bolton? If we do this, you follow our protocols exactly. You wear a wire. You stay in public. You don't play hero. I'm not a hero, Jarrett said quietly. I'm just a man who lost everything. And I want the person responsible to face justice. After Lang hung up, Jarrett began drafting the press release. But his mind was elsewhere, thinking about Leslie. They'd never had children. It had always been someday, pushed back by careers and plans and the comfortable assumption that time was infinite. Now there would be no someday. No children to carry forward Leslie's laugh, her kindness, her way of seeing the good in everyone. All that was left was this, making sure Vincent Brennan answered for what he'd done. Jarrett hit send on the press release. The announcement went to every major news outlet, every book blog, every social media platform he had access to. Best-selling author Jarrett Bolton to reveal truth about wife's death in plane crash. Press conference. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Denver Press Club. The public deserves to know what really happened to Flight 447. Within minutes, his phone exploded with calls and texts. News agencies wanting interviews. Readers expressing shock and support. His agent demanding to know what he was doing. And one text from Vincent. See you tomorrow. Jarrett smiled grimly. The trap was set. Now he just had to survive it. Chapter 6. The Wire. The Denver Press Club occupied a historic building downtown, all exposed brick and polished wood. Jarrett arrived at 8 a.m., 2 hours early, to work with Detective Livingston's team on the setup. Wire goes here, a tech specialist named Ton Shields explained, taping a small device to Jarrett's chest. Don't touch it, don't mention it, don't do anything that might reveal your recording. And if Vincent searches me, then we move in immediately. But we're hoping he'll be too focused on stopping the press conference to think that far ahead. Officer Lang appeared with coffee. Surveillance is in position. We have undercover officers in the building, plain clothes on the street, and SWAT on standby 2 blocks away. The moment Vincent makes a move, we take him down. What about the press? Jarrett asked. Real reporters are going to show up. Let them. Better cover. Vincent is less likely to try anything violent with witnesses. But Jarrett wasn't sure about that. Vincent had already murdered Leslie, killed Lopez, and was planning to eliminate Angelica. A room full of reporters might not stop him, might even appeal to his sense of drama. By 9:30, the press room was filling up. Local news crews, independent journalists, true crime bloggers. They set up cameras, tested audio, chatted amongst themselves about the mysterious announcement. Jarrett stood backstage, reviewing his prepared statement. It was mostly truth, Leslie's death, Vincent's obsession, the conspiracy. But he left out certain details, bait designed to make Vincent reveal himself. 9:45, no sign of Vincent. 9:50, still nothing. Maybe he's not coming, Lang said, though he didn't sound convinced. 9:55, Jarrett moved toward the stage entrance. And then he saw him. Vincent Brennan walked into the press room like he belonged there, wearing a press badge that had to be fake, carrying a leather satchel. He took a seat in the 3rd row, center aisle. Perfect position to see and be seen. Target acquired. Lang murmured into his radio. All units hold position. Let's see what he does. 10 a.m. Jarrett walked onto the stage. The room fell silent. Cameras turned. Microphones went live. Thank you for coming, Jarrett began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. 2 weeks ago, my wife Leslie Curtis Bolton died in the crash of United Flight 447. The official report called it mechanical failure. But I'm here to tell you the truth. My wife was murdered. Gasp from the audience. Reporters leaning forward. Vincent sat perfectly still, expression unreadable. The man responsible is named Vincent Brennan. He's a failed writer who blamed me for his lack of success. For 7 years, he stalked me, harassed me, made threats. And when those didn't destroy me, he escalated. Jarrett pulled up a slide on the screen behind him. Vincent's photo, his history, his connection to Dan Lopez. With the help of accomplices, Vincent sabotaged Flight 447. He had my wife impersonated so I wouldn't know she was dead until it was too late. He planned to frame me for her murder, destroy my reputation, and leave me broken. Vincent's hand moved to his satchel. Every undercover officer in the room tensed. But he made a mistake. He underestimated how much I loved Leslie, how far I would go to find the truth, how relentless I could be when someone takes everything from me. Jarrett locked eyes with Vincent across the room. Vincent Brennan, you wanted to destroy me. You wanted to see me suffer, to break me down, to prove that I deserve the pain you felt. But here's the truth. You're not the victim of injustice. You're a talentless hack who couldn't accept his own failure. And rather than work harder, rather than improve your craft, you decided to tear down someone else. Vincent stood. His satchel fell open. Time slowed. Jarrett saw the gun. Small, silver, identical to the one Angelica had held in his car. "Get down!" Lang shouted. Officers converged from all directions. But Vincent was faster than they expected, fueled by rage and desperation. He raised the weapon toward the stage. Jarrett dubbed behind the podium as the first shot rang out. Chaos erupted. Reporters screaming, fleeing. Officers tackling Vincent, but not before a second shot cracked through the air. Jarrett felt something hot graze his shoulder. Pain blossomed, but he stayed down, stayed covered. "Weapon secure," someone shouted. When Jarrett finally looked up, Vincent was on the ground, surrounded by officers, the gun kicked away. Blood trickled from Jarrett's shoulder. Just a graze, nothing serious. But Vincent was laughing. Even with his face pressed to the floor, hands being cuffed, he was laughing. "You think you've won?" Vincent spat. "You think this is over? I destroyed you, Jarrett. I killed the thing you loved most. You'll never be whole again. Every day, for the rest of your life, you'll remember that I took her from you." Jarrett stood slowly, applying pressure to his shoulder. He walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at Vincent. "You're right," Jarrett said quietly. "You did destroy part of me. The part that believed in second chances, in mercy, in letting the law handle monsters like you. But you know what else you did?" Vincent glared up at him. "You reminded me who I was before Leslie. Before success. Before safety. You reminded me that I'm a survivor. And survivors don't break. They adapt. They overcome. They win." Jarrett turned to the cameras, still rolling, capturing everything. "Vincent Brennan murdered my wife. He killed Dan Lopez. He tried to kill me. And now the whole world knows. He wanted fame? He's got it. He'll be remembered forever as the pathetic coward who couldn't create, only destroy." As officers hauled Vincent away, still screaming threats and curses, Jarrett felt something shift inside him. Not closure. He'd never have that. But something else. Purpose. Direction. Leslie was gone, but her memory deserved more than revenge. It deserved a legacy. Chapter 7. The Trial. 3 months later, Jarrett sat in the courtroom gallery, watching Vincent Brennan's trial unfold. The prosecution had built an airtight case. Angelica's testimony, financial records showing payments to Dan Lopez, Vincent's own threatening messages, and social media posts. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity, years of perceived injustice driving Vincent to a break with reality. But the premeditation was too clear, the planning too detailed. On the witness stand, Angelica Alvarado looked different from the woman who'd held a gun on Jarrett. Smaller somehow, younger without the theatrical confidence. She answered the prosecutor's questions in a steady voice, explaining how Vincent had recruited her. "He told me Jarrett Bolton had ruined his life," Angelica said. "That he'd stolen Vincent's work, sabotaged his career, destroyed his chance at success. Vincent showed me rejection letters, bad reviews, evidence of what he called a conspiracy. He made it seem like we were fighting back against injustice." "And when did you realize it wasn't justice?" the prosecutor asked. "When I saw Jarrett's face after the phone call. The pain, the shock, the grief. That was real. Everything Vincent had told me was a lie. Jarrett hadn't done anything to Vincent except exist, be successful, be happy. That was Vincent's real crime. He couldn't stand someone else having what he wanted." The defense attorney tried to shake her testimony, but Angelica held firm. She'd made a deal, testimony for a reduced sentence. But more than that, she seemed determined to atone. When Jarrett took the stand, he kept his testimony factual, controlled. He described Leslie, her warmth, her intelligence, her belief in second chances. He explained his history with Vincent, the baseless accusations, the years of harassment. "Did you ever steal Vincent Brennan's manuscript?" the prosecutor asked. "No, I never saw his manuscript. I never communicated with him until after he began stalking me. His accusations were fantasy, delusion, a justification for his own failure." The defense attorney cross-examined aggressively, trying to paint Jarrett as arrogant, dismissive of Vincent's struggles. But Jarrett didn't take the bait. I understand the pain of rejection, Jarrett said. I was rejected by 43 agents before finding representation. My first novel was turned down by every major publisher. I know how it feels to believe you're talented and have the world disagree. But I worked harder. I improved. I earned my success. And Vincent Brennan didn't. Vincent Brennan chose to blame others instead of looking inward. That's not a writing problem. That's a character problem. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, murder for hire, attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon. The sentencing hearing was brief. Vincent showed no remorse, gave no apology. He used his final statement to rant about injustice, stolen dreams, corruption in publishing. The judge cut him off. Mr. Brennan, you didn't fail because of conspiracy. You failed because you lacked talent, discipline, and basic human decency. You murdered an innocent woman to satisfy your ego. You destroyed lives because your feelings were hurt. The court sentences you to life in prison without possibility of parole. As Vincent was led away, he locked eyes with Jarrett one last time. But there was no triumph there, no satisfaction, just emptiness. The obsession that had defined Vincent's life was over, and he had nothing left. Jarrett felt no joy in the verdict. Leslie was still gone. Lopez was still dead. The damage couldn't be undone. But justice had been served. Chapter 8, the book. 6 months after the trial, Jarrett sat in his office. The same office where Angelica had planted evidence, where Vincent's plot had nearly destroyed him. He'd reclaimed the space, made it his again. On his desk was a manuscript. Not the fictional version he'd sent to Vincent as bait, but the real story. Every detail, every emotion, every moment from the phone call to the verdict. He'd titled it The Imposter's Price. His agent had begged him not to write it. Too soon, she'd said. Too raw. Take time to heal first. But Jarrett needed to write it. Not for revenge or exposure. Vincent was already in prison. Not for money or fame. His career was secure without exploiting tragedy. He wrote it for Leslie, because her story deserved to be told. The brilliant marketing executive who believed in helping small businesses succeed. The woman who'd convinced him to try fostering dogs, which led to them adopting 3 rescues. The partner who'd supported his writing even when it meant weeks of him lost in dark plots. Leslie had been real, vibrant, full of life. Vincent had tried to erase her, make her just a pawn in his revenge plot. This book was Jarrett's way of ensuring she remained real, remained remembered. He'd also written about the others: Tamara Bond, Jody Mills, Bobby Chan, women Vincent had hurt or killed, their stories lost in the shadows. Agent Warren had provided what detail she could, and Jarrett had interviewed families, friends, anyone willing to talk. Each woman got a chapter. Each story was honored. The manuscript ended with a dedication. For Leslie, who saw the good in everyone. I'm sorry the world didn't protect you from those who saw only themselves. Jarrett's publisher had accepted the book immediately, but with one condition. All proceeds beyond Jarrett's advance would go to a foundation in Leslie's name, supporting victims of stalking and domestic terrorism. The book was scheduled for release in 3 months. Early reviews from advance copies were calling it devastating, essential, a masterwork of true crime and personal memoir. But Jarrett didn't care about reviews anymore. He'd learned the hard way that success and accolades meant nothing without people to share them with. A knock on his office door. Jarrett looked up to see Officer Lang, now Detective Lang, after his promotion. Thought you'd want to know, Lang said. Angelica Alvarado was sentenced this morning. 8 years, eligible for parole and 5 with good behavior. She's being transferred to a facility in California, part of her witness protection arrangement. She helped put Vincent away, Jarrett said. That count for something? It does. She also sent this. Lang handed over an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Mr. Bolton, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I think about Leslie every day. I think about what she might have accomplished, who she might have helped, the life she should have lived. I was weak. I let Vincent manipulate me because I wanted to believe I was fighting for something righteous. but there was nothing righteous about what we did. We were monsters, and I'll spend the rest of my life atoning. I'm using my time in prison to get my teaching degree. When I get out, I want to work with troubled youth, help them avoid the path I took. It's not enough. Nothing will ever be enough. But it's something. Your wife was a good person who died because of my choices. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it, but I'm sorry anyway. Angelica Alvarado. Jarrett folded the letter carefully. He didn't forgive her, wasn't sure he ever could, but he recognized the attempt at redemption, however inadequate. One more thing, Lang said. We recovered Leslie's personal effects from the crash site. Her phone was damaged, but the cloud backup had some videos and photos. Thought you might want them. He handed over a thumb drive. After Lang left, Jarrett sat for a long time before plugging in the drive. He was afraid of what he'd find, afraid of the pain. But Leslie deserved to be remembered. The files were mostly mundane, work presentations, travel photos, selfies. But there was one video, dated the morning of the crash, recorded in her Dallas hotel room. Jarrett clicked play. Leslie's face filled the screen, sleep-tousled and smiling. Hey babe, I know you're probably still sleeping, but I couldn't help myself. I just got the news. We landed the Redmond account. Can you believe it? All those months of pitching, and they finally said yes. I'm so excited I can barely breathe. She paused, her expression softening. I miss you. I know it's only been 3 days, but I miss you. I can't wait to get home, to tell you everything in person, to celebrate properly. You know what? Let's do something crazy when I get back. Let's take that trip to Ireland we've been talking about. Life is too short to keep putting off the things that matter. Her smile brightened. I love you, Jarrett Bolton. See you tonight. The video ended. Jarrett sat in silence, tears streaming down his face. Leslie had been happy in her last hours, excited about life, about the future. Vincent had stolen that from her, stolen all the experiences she'd never have, the dreams she'd never achieve. But he couldn't steal her from Jarrett's memory, couldn't erase the 10 years they'd shared, the love they'd built. Vincent had tried to destroy Jarrett through revenge. Instead, he'd reminded him what was worth fighting for. Jarrett opened a new document. Not a book this time, but a letter of his own. Dear Leslie, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry for every moment we'll never share. But I promise you this, your death won't be meaningless. Your story will help others. Your foundation will save lives. Your memory will inspire people to be kinder, braver, better. Vincent wanted to destroy you, to hurt me. Instead, he proved how remarkable you were, how much you mattered, how deep love can run. I'll never move on, but I'll move forward, because that's what you'd want. Because living well, living fully, is the best revenge against those who deal in death. I love you. Always. Jarrett. He printed the letter and placed it in a frame on his desk, where he could see it every day. Then he returned to his manuscript. There was still work to do, still stories to tell, still a life to live, even if it looked different than he'd planned. Leslie would have wanted him to keep going. So he would. Chapter 9. Legacy. 1 year after Leslie's death, the Leslie Curtis Bolton Foundation held its first annual fundraiser. Jarrett stood at the podium in a Denver hotel ballroom, looking out at 300 people who'd come to support the cause. Survivors of stalking, families who'd lost loved ones to obsessive violence, law enforcement officers who specialized in threat assessment, mental health professionals working with fixated individuals. My wife believed in second chances, Jarrett began. She believed people could change, could grow, could overcome their worst impulses. Vincent Brennan proved her wrong about that. Some people are beyond redemption. He paused, gathering himself. But most people aren't Vincent. Most people experiencing obsessive thoughts, fixation, or unhealthy attachment can be helped. Early intervention saves lives, both the person suffering and their potential victims. That's what this foundation does. We identify, we intervene, we educate. The foundation had partnered with universities to study the psychology of fixation. They'd created training programs for law enforcement to recognize warning signs. They'd established hotlines for families worried about loved ones showing obsessive behavior. In its first year, the foundation had prevented 3 potential tragedies, Individuals who'd been flagged by the program, received intervention, and stepped back from dangerous paths. 3 people who might have become the next Vincent Brennan. 3 potential victims who went on living their lives, never knowing how close danger had come. Leslie didn't die for a reason, Jarrett continued. There is no reason good enough to justify her death. But we can give her death meaning by preventing others from suffering the same fate. We can honor her by building something positive from tragedy. After the speech, Jarrett mingled with attendees. A young woman approached him, nervous but determined. Mr. Bolton? My name is Grace. My brother was fixated on a coworker. It was getting scary. Your foundation helped us get him into treatment. He's doing better now. The coworker is safe. I just want to say thank you. Jarrett shook her hand, feeling the weight of those words. One life saved. One family spared the horror he'd experienced. Thank Leslie, he said quietly. This is her legacy. Later that night, Jarrett drove to the cemetery. He did this every week, bringing fresh flowers, sitting by Leslie's headstone, telling her about his day. The fundraiser was a success, he said, arranging the flowers. Iris's her favorite. We raised enough to expand the program to 3 more states. You be proud. The night was quiet, stars bright overhead. I finished the book. It comes out next month. I'm nervous about it, but I think I got it right. I think I told your story the way it deserved to be told. He paused, listening to the wind through the trees. Vincent appealed his sentence. It was denied. He'll die in prison, and honestly, I don't think about him much anymore. He's not worth the energy. You are. Building something meaningful in your name. That's worth it. Jarrett stood, touching the cold stone. I met someone. Don't worry, I'm not. It's not like that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she volunteers at the foundation, and we've been talking. Her name is Christine. She lost her sister to a stalker 5 years ago. She understands. He felt guilty admitting it, like he was betraying Leslie's memory. But he could almost hear her voice. Don't be stupid, Jarrett. Don't spend your life alone. I want you to be happy. I'll always love you, he said. Nothing changes that. But I think I'm ready to start living again. Really living, not just surviving. You want that from me, right? The stars offered no answer, but Jarrett felt a sense of peace anyway. He'd survived Vincent's revenge. He'd gotten justice. He'd honored Leslie's memory. Now it was time for the next chapter. As Jarrett drove home, his phone buzzed. A text from his agent. The Imposter's Price just hit #1 on the NYT pre-sale list. You did it. Leslie would be so proud. Jarrett smiled. The book would reach millions of readers. It would educate, inspire, warn.